We're not constantly reacting. I'm not just walking down the street and worried about something jumping out around every corner. And so the idea of incidental offense, even if you look at like stepping and pivoting and getting outside of the elbows, not standing directly in front of the problem, facing the problem, but not standing directly in front of it, that allows us to at least stay a step ahead. We're almost problem solving preemptively.
Welcome to the Second Plan A podcast, where we take hard-earned lessons from the mats and convert them into tools for navigating life's challenges. I'm Amber Hoover. I'd rather stick to the plan.
And I'm Ryan Hoover, and plan for the unexpected is one of the dumbest things that people say.
What a terrible slogan.
So stupid.
That's not how that works. So today we are moving to our second Plan A. On this episode, you guys, but I have no excuses, you know me. On this episode, we're taking a hard look at the differences between cutting angles and cutting corners, because one sharpens your game and the other dulls your edges. The myth of multitasking is still running rampant, wrecking focus, spreading chaos. Kind of like the word ambidextrous in my Krav Maga intro class. I had that one again last night. Fantastic. Anyway, are you ready to shut out the noise, lock in, and focus on just this episode?
I stopped listening a long time ago.
Oh, good. We're already out. He's already multitasking. Beautiful. I love it. Okay. So when we talk about multitasking, we're really talking about the ability.
Who's we? I don't talk about multitasking.
I'm going to give you that that opening too. When the general ether of community talk about multitasking, it's really talking about the ability to shift attention and how we make the choice of choosing what's worthy of our attention. Choose in quotes, and more on that later. But while it sounds like multitasking can mean you're getting more done, the costs of it are often overlooked. And we've addressed some of those in this podcast before. I know you have thoughts on multitasking, so I'm going to go ahead and let you drop them right here.
I mean, it's really just one thought. It's not a real thing. I mean, can you do more than one thing at once? Yes, very poorly.
Yeah.
Right? It's people that are running around like chickens with their heads cut off, that are like, oh, I'm doing this, and I got to do this, and I'm working on this, and whatever. You're just doing all of that stuff not well, because that's how we're programmed. We're not designed to be able to focus at a high level on multiple things at the same time. Again, it's not that we can't do multiple things at the same time. Usually they are things that are kind of rote, that they're routine. They're things that we do driving, messing with the radio, thinking about what I'm going to do. But it's things that over time we have done for hundreds, thousands of times, as opposed to, I'm trying to work on 3 different projects at the same time. That doesn't work. That's 1, 2, or all are going to suffer. Probably all. So I just don't think that's a real thing. Not the way that people
say
try
it's
to say
a real
it.
thing. I mean, you can eat and scroll Facebook, and that would be pretty true to multitasking.
Because those things don't really
require
much
attention or focus.
Thought.
Yeah. So when this general population that we're talking about refers to multitasking, they're actually talking about switching between tasks and jumping between one to the other, and usually pretty rapidly. And so what they're missing out on is the cost that comes with that. It's not just as simple as, okay, I'm doing this thing, and now I'm doing this thing, and I'm going back to this thing. The brain actually needs time to disengage from one and fully switch to the other. And so it's not common that we can do this, and it's not usually wanted. We gain as humans by being able to focus, and there are a lot of books and self-help guides and better workflow, 4-hour work week, that kind of stuff that tries to help you focus on doing one thing at a time, because switching is so costly. The tough part is when you do need to switch, you need to have that flexibility to do so, and that flexibility is what separates out us from dolphins and whatever. So we experienced firsthand how difficult it can be to have this cognitive flexibility And it also speaks to how difficult it can be to move to a second plan A, especially if you're not prepped for it. For those of you who don't know, we were at SHOT Show this past week in Las Vegas, and there's always great stories from SHOT Show, and there are definitely some that we will not share here, but there is one very prominent one that right off the bat, right off our trip, we experienced. So
Yeah.
Ryan set the stage.
So we flew out Monday night
Yep.
and got to our hotel probably sometime around midnight or so,
Yeah.
something like that, maybe a little after. And there was a line for check-in, which at that time, Vegas is always open and it's always busy and there's always activity. But at that time, you don't normally have much of a line at check-in. So that right off the jump seemed a little abnormal. We go to the kiosk to skip the line. And I will say, I think this was my 10th year at SHOT Show, and I've had a couple of other Vegas trips in addition to that. So in 10 years, I've probably been to Vegas 12, 14 times,
14 even,
something like
yeah.
that. And the kiosks have never worked. Not
They're
once.
it's
No matter
always
what
messed up.
hotel, they never work. And so it should have been an indicator right from jump that these seem to be operational. And so we're checking in, and we get to the point where it's printing off a receipt with, a check-in status and a room number and everything. And it says that your keys are coming up next. And then all of a sudden it goes out of service and all the other kiosks go out of service. And we're like, well, awesome. So we have this printout. So we go get in line, which, I've noticed the line has not moved, and there were only two people behind the counter, and they kept leaving, which was really strange. And so we stand there for, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes. You can tell that the people in line in front of us are pretty annoyed, pretty frustrated. And standing there, have conversation with a couple of them, and it sounds like they've been standing there for quite a while. And then finally, in one of the trips from wherever these people were going, they come out and they say that their system is down. And it's not just their system, it's the hotel next to us, and we're at a Caesar's property, and so they're like, we can't check people in, we can't print keys, we don't know how long it's going to take. Our manager is working on it. My immediate thought is, this is a multi-billion-dollar global conglomerate, and you
almost
have,
the entire strip is really owned by one
Yes.
entity.
And you have no redundancies in place.
Yeah.
You have no backups. We're relying on a manager there should be the equivalent of an IT SWAT team coming in and fixing this.
That's what they have for the slot machines.
Slot machines are down for like 40 seconds,
Yeah.
and those things are back up. So they keep going away and coming back and whatever. And so I'm like, I'm wondering if, after I get past my initial, I can't believe that a company this size can't handle this, can't deal with this.
We talked about, I think it was the last podcast, when it came to airline travel.
Yeah. At my soul, I'm a problem solver, So I'm trying to figure out, all right, there has to be a solution here. And so I go up past the line, receive a few dirty looks from people in the line.
Oh, man, I can't believe there weren't full out
is
brawls.
what it is.
Yeah.
Well, they would have regretted that, but
I would have made sure to get it all on camera. Sorry, guys, that we don't have that content for you.
So one of the two ladies that was behind, I get her attention. I said, we have this printout. It says that we're checked in.
We have a room assigned to us.
Can we not just get housekeeping or security or something to let us in? Even if we don't have a key, we could at least get in the room. It's
It's
at
about
this
1
point, it's about 1
a.m.
a.m. We've got our luggage. We start
The show
running the
in the
next
morning,
morning, in a couple hours. And she's like, let me ask my manager. And the way that she said it, I thought, so she goes off. She's gone for a few minutes. She comes back. She says her manager's on the phone. And in my head, I'm thinking, okay, what does that have to do with me?
If only there were a way around that.
And so she walks off and never comes back to me.
Which,
Yeah.
to be fair.
So I don't know, I give it another maybe 10 or 15 minutes, and, you know, all the people that have been standing in line are still standing in line. I'm still not standing in line. I'm at the counter because I'm like, there is a solution here.
Yeah. They're not going to find it on their
It's
own.
really not
Yeah.
that difficult. Everybody else seems willing to just stand in this line and seethe, and I'm not willing to do that. And
Or
so,
leave their luggage in line and go spend money at the casino and bars
yeah,
of the hotel that is keeping them from checking in, which is why they're spending money at the hotel. I just couldn't handle that one, but to
yeah.
each their own.
So I get the attention of the other lady that's behind the register, and I say the same thing to her, and she says, "Well, did the kiosk charge you?" And I said, "It appears so. I have this printout, and it seems like it did. I mean, it gave us a room number." And she said, "Well, if it charged you, I can probably get security to let you in." And so she starts punching in some things, and the room was in your name, so you have to come over. And I go back and stand in the line. And ultimately, we end up meeting somebody from security. They walk us up to our room. They let us in.
We celebrate with some prepackaged food and think, oh my gosh, no one in that line is going anywhere.
No. And then so Amber goes down the next morning at like 7 o'clock, and the system is still down.
How is that
And
possible?
it's mind blowing to me. And I'm sitting here wondering what they did with all these other people.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
now we do know that at some point they decided, well, we should just have security let people in.
But would they have gotten to that point without you?
I don't think so, because I don't think they were trying to solve a problem.
No.
It was, we have a problem. Someone else is working on it. We have a system. We have a program in place. We have a protocol. The protocol is we go through this computer. It prints off these keys, blah, 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 whatever. It was not, well, let's figure out how to get these people out of this line and into their rooms.
Yep.
And, that I understand that when you're part of a major corporation, that there's a lot of black and white protocols to follow and whatever.
Sure.
But when you're in a service industry, and you're that big of a company and you don't have redundancies in place and you don't have backup plans, then you need the freedom of being able to have critical thinkers on staff. Like, at the very least, the manager should have been trying to figure out other ways of getting people into their rooms. So yeah, that's so that I probably took longer than I should have to tell that story, but man, it's mind blowing to me. One, that again, there aren't second plans
Yeah.
to deal with problems when something inevitably goes wrong, because things go wrong, things happen.
Well, we're out internet every once in a while at peak times in the center, and we figure it out. We make it work. We might have a quiet gym for a bit, but it's part of our job to make sure we can have the necessary things done so that people can come in and have their experience. It's not like if they can't sign a digital waiver, we're just like, well, you can't train because we don't have a waiver.
Yeah.
We have paper waivers for that reason.
Right.
So there's a lot of lessons there
Yeah.
that no one learned, I'm sure. However, maybe the people on staff, at least that night, now have a second plan A to think about because it's happened before and they have this option. But
Maybe. I mean, you've got two people out of hundreds that
That's-
probably worked that front desk.
without a doubt. I would like to think that at some point at least a memo went out.
Perhaps.
But who knows? It made me think of, though, there's a book. This is going to be the least literary infused book I've ever quoted on here, but there was an old lady who swallowed a fly. I don't know why she swallowed a fly. Perhaps she'll die. And then she swallows a spider to catch the fly. She swallows a cat to catch the spider, a dog to catch the cat, and you see where this is going.
Yeah.
And eventually she swallows a horse. She's dead, of course. And there are plenty of lessons to gain there, but there's rigidity in that problem solving that we see day in and day out. And it sounds ridiculous when you're thinking about this lady trying to swallow goats and cows and whatever, but it's just this very linear, inflexible, oh, I swallowed a fly, which, by the way, would have been fine.
Yeah.
But she's like, well, let me try to get it with a spider.
Right.
Well, let me try to get, and at no point realizing, oh, this isn't solving the problem. Because
Which
I don't know
wasn't
what
actually
which
a
actually
problem
wasn't a problem.
to begin with.
Well, and I think it's funny because I opened my notebook to take notes, but I have notes that I wrote the next morning because I strive to be the problem solving type that you are, and it's not innate to me. So I have to work hard on it. And my focus would have stayed on we need the system running. It's just I know I get locked in,
Right.
and that helps sometimes. Sometimes I can expand out and bring on that flexibility, but a lot of times I don't. So I wrote down, well, what's the problem? Why is that the problem? And I think getting to that why is what allows you the flexibility. The problem wasn't that the system's down,
Yep.
even though I was focused on that.
Right.
The actual problem was we can't check people in to get them into their rooms.
Yes.
Well, how do we circumvent that?
Right.
And that might be you send housekeeping to rooms that we're supposed to check out today because we have that list, that report, whatever.
Yep.
Once they confirm it's clean and empty, we, even if it's physically writing down, assign these people to that room, tell security, whatever, and you can go on. So what's the problem? Why is that the problem? How else can we make it work?
Yeah.
And for me, I need that structure to get to the point, and you seem to do it pretty innately, but maybe it's because you've just done it over and over and over again that you've developed that flexibility.
Yeah, I don't know. It's on some level, it's probably like a lot of other things. I think some things just come naturally to some people.
Sure.
Some things don't. I naturally do not stick to protocols and rules and guidelines and things, and that is sometimes problematic.
Especially as a child.
It's just not how I tend to operate. So, there's probably it's like everything we talk about, there's probably some level of nature, some level of nurture to it. You've developed these things over time. I think as a small business owner, you have to have that kind of mindset, that kind of mentality. You have to have that flexibility. You have to be able to turn on a dime. You have to be able to step, pivot, and move and get outside and not always think in this very linear kind of progression, because that's just not how life goes.
Yeah. So cognitive flexibility, I mentioned it a couple times. That's the ability to assess a situation and appropriately adapt the strategies, the thinking processes you need according to this new situation or environment. Typically, adults are better at this, and there's genetics and age and experience, nature, nurture to it, what you were just saying. The other side of having this cognitive flexibility, it borders into like ADHD diagnosis, where ADHD would be signaled or could be seen with a persistent level of high cognitive flexibility. If you're constantly switching and not able to focus on one thing, that has its detriments on the other side.
Right.
And for the most part, a lot of your life, it's about focusing and controlling your flexibility and not continuing to switch. But then we look at, not the hotel situation maybe, but life and death situations where you're going about your day and everything's fine, and all of a sudden you're T-boned upside down, and now you have to make a big jump and a big switch with that. And that, again, life and death, you have to switch, and you've been trained your whole life not to have this high quick switch.
Yeah, and I mean, some of that, just our innate survival kind of programming is going to kick in. Though
Luckily.
I think we've touched on this before. Like, I do think we're maybe a few or dozen generations beyond where we've almost programmed some of that out of us by making things so easy for us. That maybe we don't make those switches, those pivots quite as quickly or quite as easily as maybe we did at some point in our evolution, our existence. Just because, as humans, because we are high level thinkers, problem solvers as a species, I think we have tried to make everything so easy that
solve the problems ahead of time.
Yeah, which is fine, but as generations come after us, they're no longer faced with the same level of problems,
right?
And so they don't have to go through the process of figuring it out. And so when something like a wreck or whatever it does happen, they're not as nearly as used to having to make those switches in real time.
It's funny because that's exactly what I wanted to say to you in a very, very different way. So there was a study done where they were tracking task switching, and they would give the group a similar task to do and then you could see when they switched the task how much longer it took to respond and react and that sort of thing. But they found out that if you prepped the switch with anything, any kind of stimulus, you gave them this quick indicator, hey, something's about to change, they did better. And so in this experiment, they were talking about it could even be just a picture of a dog. You're doing this task, you're doing this task, you're doing this task. Picture of a dog comes up. Oh, okay, so the next thing's going to be different, and it preps you to switch over. And I think that Pavlovian response that we can use for our own ability to switch comes in adrenaline dumps and whatever, because we did have to switch from everything's fine to the, oh shit, there's a saber-toothed tiger about to attack kind of thing.
Right.
And so that was hard. You don't get a lot of prep time, but you do get enough. You get that quick initial stimulus, oh God, and then we go. So I think we just don't experience that over and over again because we've taken away those problems. We've made them easier. Right. And so when we do get it, even with that prep of being upside down in my car or whatever it is, there's still a bigger gap and a delay in response.
Yeah. Well, so there's a few things here. Obviously, we're a long way from saber-toothed tigers, but the idea of, if we just stay with that for a minute, once I've seen a few people getting eaten by saber-toothed tigers, then I'm going to take on this.
God, we're so soft. I've never seen someone get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger by anything.
In our fighting, we talk about incidental defense. And incidental defense, for those of you that don't know, it's a concept where I am doing things with my posture. I am doing things with the way that I move, the things that I do that allow me to mitigate variables and remain offensive. So if we talk like self-defense by nature is reactive.
Ryan has come alive in this. Like, you can tell he's passionate about what he's talking about. He popped up off the table. His hands are going. If you're not watching right now, jump back to minute 20 or so and come check this out.
In order for me to mitigate variables and win, for lack of a better term, I need to be offensive. And the best way for me to be offensive and not worry as much about taking damage is to control as many variables as I can on the front end. So if we're talking about self-defense, again, it's reactive. I'm already being choked, I'm already being punched, I'm already being tackled, whatever. Whereas self-protection is a bit more proactive. I am aware of my surroundings. My hands are up and back. I'm posturing. I'm getting outside of their elbows. I'm mitigating their ability to do damage to me by controlling what I can on the front end. And so if we kind of apply that to life, if we look at it from a family perspective or a small business perspective or school or whatever, once we've seen a few people getting eaten by saber-toothed tigers, then we at least are aware that this is possible. And so now, all right, well, saber-toothed tigers prowl at a certain time of day, so we mitigate our hours at those times of day. They don't like loud noises, whatever it is. And so we start to adapt these incidental defenses. We start to allow ourselves to move through our day, tackle whatever is coming, with an understanding of what we are likely to encounter, and we are prepped for it in a way that we're not constantly reacting. I'm not just walking down the street and worried about something jumping out around every corner. And so the idea of incidental defense, even if you look at like stepping and pivoting and getting outside of the elbows, not standing directly in front of the problem, facing the problem, but not standing directly in front of it.
Not letting the problem face you if you can help it.
Yes. That allows us to at least stay a step ahead. And so we're
a step and a pivot ahead.
We're almost problem solving preemptively.
Yeah. Well, it's just like when you're driving at dusk, I'm scanning the sides of the roads like I usually am, but I'm checking for eyeballs reflecting off my headlights and looking for deer on the side of the road,
Right.
much less than I am looking for somebody on a bicycle.
Right.
So you mentioned all this incidental defense talk is about being able to do damage without taking damage. Ideally, not trading one danger for another, but especially not making it even more dangerous. And there's time to take risk. We've talked about that. I want to pull that back to there was an old lady who swallowed a fly. I had no idea this. I was going to reference this so much, but you are trading one danger for the other, creating a bigger and bigger problem by continuing to do what you're trying to do as your means of problem solving. And if that isn't a metaphor for some of life, I don't know what is.
Well, it's I follow, I don't know if it's on Instagram or Facebook or maybe both, I don't know, but I follow Gary Vee, and I like a lot of what Gary Vee still says and does. But it's like anything else, and you know, I get it, because a lot of times he's just throwing out little sound bites, just, you know, a few words, and it's hard to in a few words really express like high level concepts. But you'll see things like, don't overthink it, just do shit. Well, we're creating a false dichotomy here, because there is don't overthink and there is
Do shit.
But there's also some things in between, right? If I just do shit without putting the incidentals in place, without recognizing what's going to potentially keep me from successfully doing shit, then what am I really doing? Now, if I overthink it and I never actually do anything, then that's a whole other problem. So, you know, the idea of incidental defense, it's like you walk into a room, you flip on a light switch, you don't really think about it. You don't have to look at where the light switch is. You know, you've done it over and over and over again. It becomes just part of what you do. It's like you drive to work, you don't remember to drive, you know, but you're doing a lot of high level things in that, because you put the time in. You've hopefully over time become a better driver, which allows you to move at high rates of speed, think about other things beyond just driving,
and still have the flexibility ready and prepped if something happens.
Yes.
So when you flip on that light switch, you're expecting light to come on. You're expecting to be able to see things better. And yet you flip on that light switch and someone is sitting on your couch that you weren't expecting, and there's still a jump. And that's expectations creeping back in too.
Once something ordinary becomes out of the ordinary, you know, that's where reactionary gaps and those kinds of things come into play. And our ability to switch. Now we're talking about that switch. Our ability to switch from, I'm just expecting light, I'm expecting sight, I'm expecting to be able to see my room, to there's someone unexpected in here or something unexpected in here, and being able to process that, recognize it as either a problem or not a problem, and then formulate action or not, you know. And again, I think some of that is how we do that is based on who we are as just people, and then some of that is based on what our life experiences have been. I mean, you see it all the time. Different people affected very differently by the same or very similar stimulus, you know. Some things that cause people to scream in fear have very little effect on others. And again, I think that's probably a combination of the nature nurture thing.
It's interesting because turning the light on, you don't have expectations. You're not specifically thinking. You know, there's no conscious effort. There we go. That's the word I wanted. There's no conscious attention to it. And yet still something disrupts us and pulls us back into the conscious nature of it. And so the switching costs, there's two sides of them. There's reconfiguration, and that's the demand of going from what I was doing before, just light switch on about my day, I'm going to put my groceries up, I'm going to go get a shower, whatever, to person in my house, what am I doing? And then there's interference, and that's the influence of what you were previously doing and now just irrelevant stimulus that you have to ignore. And so in that situation, it might be your hands full of groceries that you were going to put down on the counter and not being able to just drop them to the floor and deal with the problem. And we saw this happen. There was an attack on the light rail in Charlotte years, maybe a decade ago. And it was somebody holding pointing a gun at someone, and he's on the phone, and there's video of this guy redirecting the weapon while getting his phone in his pocket. And he ended up being okay. He goes on to do fine, but not being able, that interference of the previous task set of not being able to just ditch your phone and let go is a huge cost to, well, causing the inflexibility that we need to defend ourselves.
Yeah. And we've seen this in a lot of scenarios, where people have a very difficult time switching from one task to the next, even if it's something as simple as just dropping a thing. And there's no shortage of those videos,
Right. There was the
cops
with
and
the machete.
we've seen all kinds of examples of this because, again, under stress, our bodies tend to do certain things, and if we're not prepping them,
if we're not training, if we haven't thought ahead of the experience.
Right.
So I'm going to pull this into the fight world a little further, less on the self-defense side and more on just the training side, where one of the toughest things in the progression of developing your skills and training is being able to combine wrestling and striking to be a more well-rounded fighter. If you watch newer people, they can, if they've started in wrestling, they can probably only wrestle. If they started in striking, they can probably only strike.
Right.
And then as they develop both skill sets and you try to implement them in sparring, what you see is very defined lines of, this is kickboxing, this is wrestling, this is kickboxing, this is wrestling. And then by the time you hit black belt type level for us, for Fit to Fight, you can see the melding of the two skills of understanding when I need to switch into a more clinching based skill set, when I need to switch into kickboxing.
They're just fighting.
They're fighting, yeah. But they're not multitasking, they are making these switches, but it's seamless and it makes sense.
Right. Yeah, we often coach and talk about working in isolation and working in restriction because I think people learn better that way, But ultimately, we want to get to a point where we're not having to do everything in isolation or everything in restriction. I just had this past Saturday in class. Had some students that went from a jiu-jitsu class to my modern Krav Maga class, and I happened to be doing ground fighting.
Yep.
And, our ground fighting is jiu-jitsu, judo, wrestling based. But the context is very different.
Yeah. The context changed, the goal changed, the problem changed.
Right. And so the solution on some level needs to change. Right. We're going to use very similar moves and movements and concepts, but ultimately, where in jiu-jitsu, my goal is to stay in jiu-jitsu range. My goal is to stay connected to this person. In a self-defense context, my goal is to get away from this person. There's moments in time where I'm going to get closer to them. I'm going to look to get more control of them. I'm going to look to do damage to them. But now I have to consider that maybe we're on asphalt, maybe we're between cars. And ultimately, I'm not necessarily trying to hit a simple sweep, get knee on belly, knee slide up under their arm, get head and arm control, get an underhook, whatever, and I'm attached to this protracted grappling match versus I hit that sweep, I get knee on belly, I punch them, I get up and I get out of there.
Yeah.
And so from a fight perspective, it's when you first start, it is very difficult to not hyper fixate on one or the other.
Right.
Ultimately, we're not wrestling, we're not kickboxing, we're fighting. We're using wrestling and kickboxing in our fighting, but there's not this delineation necessarily where, you could look at it and make these hard lines between the two.
There shouldn't be.
One is going to facilitate the other.
Yeah.
And vice versa.
So we've talked about the social dilemma. We went pretty hard on that. Mm-hmm. That idea and the documentary that has that name. Mm-hmm. And one of the studies I was looking at used the term acquired inattention as just our current status. This might be what it is. And it's interesting. So Ryan's rewatching. I'm watching for the first time Mad Men. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of wild to me. It's set in the 1960s, 1950s, 1960s, to see these offices. And, you've got typewriters and some dictation type software, but
Yep.
it's crazy to see no laptops everywhere, even just big old hunky computers everywhere,
Right.
because they don't exist, obviously, but
Yep.
it's just a blank desk. There are books, there are papers, like you're on your own to think and do things. And I think about, terms of acquired inattention, what that means to me is, well, if I'm trying to do research and the website page is loading and it takes maybe 3 to 5 seconds, which is, of course, an eternity, I move on and I do something else real quick, which is multitasking, which is switching, which has switching costs. And then I'm moving on to a different tab and I forget why I was loading that tab, or I forget to go back to it. And that's part of what is ingrained in us, this acquired inattention, and not even multitasking as a positive, being able to switch back and forth, but as a negative, because I'm not focusing on any one thing and giving it the seconds it needs.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, again, it's a lot of that is just what we become used to.
Yeah.
Like I remember dial up
Right.
very clearly. And that truly seemed like an eternity, but it was still fast compared to I got to get in a car, I got to go to the library, I got to go through the card catalog to find a book, and then I got to go on the third level of the library to find this book if it's there and if it's in the right place, and if it's not in the right place, I got to go talk to somebody, and so it's relative to what we are accustomed to, and again, like as we move through generations and generations that didn't experience that with a library where you're having to search through things on microfiche, and you can't just grab your phone and look up something, then as a page loads and it takes 3 seconds, it seems like an eternity. Whereas a page loads and it takes 3 seconds for me, I'm like, man, this is incredible. But if that's all I've ever known, then a low signal seems like debilitating.
Yes. Well, and to be fair, a low signal is debilitating. No, I didn't even think about, like, if I'm going to the library to find a book, I'm probably looking it up in their database on a computer to go see where it is.
Yes.
That blew my mind a little bit.
We physically were pulling out drawers and searching through cards and
Yeah.
It's
I've heard of this.
Yeah.
I do think acquired inattention is a good current status, state of the world, state of the nation kind of idea for us. So there was a study done tracking eye movement in a driving simulation, and they looked at the difference between somebody just focused on driving and somebody driving and talking on the phone. And I think this is interesting because it presents a little bit of flexibility. Cognitive flexibility is a blessing and a curse. It's a antidote and a poison type thing. It seemed like you could drive and talk on the phone, and you can do those things. It is multitasking, and just like we talked about before, multitasking does come with a cost. And the cost they could recognize, they could measure, they could show was, while driving without talking on a phone, there was scanning side to side and in front, and there was a whole paying attention. And when they were on the phone, that scanning diminished. And it was a very clear, recognizable result.
Listen, when people are backing up in their vehicles, quite often they will turn their radio down to do this. Mm-hmm. Why?
Yeah.
Because
we lower one sense so that we can put it into the focus on the other.
So, and the radio playing doesn't really require much cognitive processing for me. Like being able to carry a conversation. Carrying a conversation is, I have to listen to what the other person's saying, I have to formulate a response, and then actually give the response. And while it's something that we do often, we're doing it at 65, 70 miles an hour with other cars around me doing the same thing. And it is not really possible to give all of our attention or our best attention to all of those things. It's just not.
I listened to a podcast on the way over here and I missed all of it. I realized when I parked, I was like, I
This
wasn't
this
listening to a
happens to
thing.
me when I'm lifting quite often. I'm lifting. I'm trying to focus on what I'm doing in my workout. I've got a podcast playing, and then I also at some point will start thinking about something that needs to happen in that day or whatever. And I'm 20 minutes gone in the podcast, and I'm like, I have no idea what is happening in this. I'm listening to true crime most of the time,
Yeah.
and I'm like, I don't even know what these people are talking about right now. I have no idea what's just happened in the past 20 minutes. And it was playing the whole time. And it's not like I'm doing like lifting doesn't require a lot of cognitive thought. It's programmed. I know what to
You've done it
do.
so much
Yes.
that it's literally a rut. You
Yes.
know exactly where to place it. Yeah.
But other thoughts have creeped into my head, and it's drawn my attention from this thing that's being piped in my ears. We're not built to do that. Again, not at high levels. We can do it very poorly,
Yeah.
but to actually be productive or efficient, it just doesn't work.
And I do feel like the more we can control our flexibility, so rather than just multitasking and throwing it every which way, because that's what's the stimulus immediately in front of me, the more we can control it, the better we are at dealing with things as they come to us.
Yeah.
So that when I'm in my repetitive nature job of checking people in at the front counter, getting them into their hotel rooms, charging their keys and go, and it's just this, something happens and I'm okay, let's shift now.
Yeah.
Versus just something comes up, shift, something comes up, shift. This website's taking a while to load, shift. And that's martial arts has a lot of background in being able to help self-control just in general, but it is a mindset. It is a flexibility concern where you're teaching somebody to focus on what you're doing right now in this moment.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of it, back to earlier part of the conversation, a lot of it is mitigating risk preemptively.
Right.
If I'm sparring, I'm hopefully I'm doing a lot of things that are putting me in a position to not end up in worst case kind of scenarios. If I'm spending a lot of my time only dealing with the absolute worst, then I'm going to spend a lot of my time dealing with the absolute worst because I'm not putting in the time to deal with the variables on the front end, mitigating what could happen, and then understanding that if we just keep it in fight terms for a second, if I end up on my back mounted, somebody punching me in the face, a lot of things have happened before we got there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if I only spend my time on dealing with, okay, well, I'm on my back, this person's mounted me, they're punching me in the face, then I don't recognize what they did to set up whatever takedown they hit, and then the progression that they moved from that takedown to get past my guard and take that mount and get their posture, and now they're punching me in the face.
Yeah, you missed a lot of things.
Yeah. And I think, life can be like that. And I think if you're a small business owner, you should be, as much as possible, trying to deal with variables before worst case happens.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times that's what people probably mean when they say, expect the unexpected, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's not a real thing.
No. But there's planning.
Right.
If this goes wrong,
yeah.
I know ahead of time this is a probability, this is a possibility, it's worth spending time thinking about.
But again, if I'm thinking about it, it's because there is some level of expectation for it.
Yeah. One more SHOT Show story that I wasn't going to talk about, but it's right here. We land in Vegas. It's probably midnight at home, 11 p.m. midnight, and turn on my phone, take it off airplane mode, and I get a message from our dog sitter that there's no key outside. And he was right. There was not a key outside. It was on my key ring now in Vegas. And
probably not helpful there.
Not super helpful. I'll save it took a few hours to download messages, so there was a lot of self-deprecation, and I was a little down on myself, and of course Ryan helped. He enjoyed it immensely. And of course we had our second plan A's ready. It was going to be okay, and we had a plan ready for when the East Coast woke up, what we were going to do. But it turned out that the dog sitter remembered a trick I showed him one of the first times he came to sit over where you can get in the house.
And now Amber's telling the world how to break into our home.
So that's our look at...
For anybody listening, I don't recommend breaking into our home. Because there is an alarm. There is a German Shepherd, a Belgian Malinois, an Amstaff, and a Boxer. And maybe a me. So...
That's the one.
Amber can continue her story, but understand that,
It won't be worth it for you.
it will not be worth it. Besides the fact that there's literally nothing of value to steal.
Pretty much just the dogs you listed. So anyway, there may or may not be a trick to get in, to break in. And, I'm obsessive and a planner. And so I had showed that to him and he remembered it, which is a miracle because we've been using him for a few years. So he ended up being okay, being able to get in. We didn't have to wake up half the world super early to get in, to get to the animals. And that's how I plan and try to mitigate variables despite making other new problems for Ryan to solve on this podcast as I talk about how to break into our house.
Okay, I think we should go.
I was about to say, I'm gonna close this thing up before I give away any more trade secrets. You guys want to know what our registration marks expire? That's our look at cognitive flexibility, overcoming obstacles, step and pivot, face your problems, don't let them face you. If you enjoyed this discussion, please leave us 5 stars, follow, share, subscribe, join the conversation on social media. I'm going to run out of here. If you didn't enjoy this podcast, keep it to yourself. It's fine. We don't need to hear from you. Thanks for listening to Second Plan A, and we look forward to growing with you next time.
Thanks, everybody.